you know, you never know. You know that they were wrongly convicted, but I never had a personal interaction with him, yet I believe that he's one of the greatest people I've ever met, you know? So I'm glad to know that it really is true, and he really is starting over in a really good way.
Mr. Gonzalez is approached by these 3 African-American males.
Turned Anthony's conviction for a murder. He says he
gets grabbed by the neck, he gets shoved up against the car, hit in the face with a gun.
But I always knew that I would get relief from this. I just didn't know when and how.
There's some cursing, there's some screaming, there's some hitting.
You know, how this has to be overturned after 17 years. How can that actually be possible?
Mr. Gonzalez was shot and killed and left in the street.
Involved a murder that took place back in 1994. He had been serving since age 19, 17 years in prison for a murder he did not do.
The Project for the Innocent investigates cases in which we think that an inmate in California State Prison was wrongfully convicted, was innocent, or had a very unfair trial. And in those cases where we feel like that's the case, we will actually investigate and work toward trying to get those people's convictions overturned and get them freed from prison.
I've had the privilege, and I really want to emphasize it, the privilege to run the Project for the Innocent at Loyola Law School. You know, by way of my background, very quickly, I'm a former prosecutor. It was my job to put people in prison every day. But I had a transformation because I've been teaching for 25 years and looking very critically at the criminal justice system. And I realized that we make mistakes, and we make tragic mistakes that affect people's lives.
Started working for Professor Levinson when I was about 13. I heard her lecture at my temple, and I went up to her at the end. I was in the Harvard Westlake basketball outfit, so I looked ridiculous in this temple full of very elderly, well-dressed people. And I went up to her, and the first thing she said is, she was like, "Nice outfit."
We have about 20 cases that we're actively investigating, and we have dozens of cases that we're starting to evaluate, the process we call screening the cases. The ones that we're really investigating, we have about 20 of them.
We can only take the most serious cases. These are people serving life in prison without parole for murders. We also take a look at where is the case. We don't have the ability to go all around the country, and there are other projects elsewhere in the country. We look at whether it's in state court or federal court, and most importantly, we look at what the claim is. Is the claim, well, I wasn't really innocent, but I don't like the sentence I got? Is the claim the jury should have believed me? Or is it something like, there's other evidence my lawyer never got, my lawyer didn't do his job? Is there evidence that the police maybe force witnesses to make identification?
Professor Levinson got me a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be a part of an actual criminal trial. And it was a televised trial. It was People v. Phil Spector, former director, since convicted of murder. Not in our trial, in a retrial. And so I had a 6-month period where every day, all day, every day, I'm working this criminal trial, going to court, seeing these lawyers argue, and losing arguments they should win, winning arguments we probably shouldn't have won.
I had some students come to me and say, you know, Professor Levinson, can we do something that matters? And I thought about it and I said, let's find something to do. And that was the birth of our Innocence Project, our Project for the Innocents, trying to do something that mattered.
During one of Phil Spector's defense attorneys was a then defense attorney, now Judge Chris Plord. And Chris is very much involved in innocence cases. He tells me about this case that he's working on at the time, Reggie Cole. There was some incident in jail, and the shot caller went to Reggie and said, okay, you're going to get to take the fall for this because you're in jail for life. There's nothing, they're not going to give you death for this. There's nothing more they can do for you. do to you. So go ahead and take the fall.
And I checked with these innocence projects around the country, and I found one in Northern California that had a case that they really needed help with. They needed help because the murder happened in Los Angeles. So I said, we'll take that case.
And Reggie says, no, I'm not. I'm innocent, and if I take the fall for this, even if I prove I'm innocent, I'm still going to get stuck in jail. So at that point, it's the shot caller gives what's referred to as a green light, basically saying, anybody who wants to go kill Reggie, go ahead and go kill Reggie. So in order for Reggie to, self-preservation, he ended up having to kill the shot caller. He had to kill him in order for Reggie to stay alive. And because of the prison murder, the state charged him for that murder and then wanted to seek the death penalty. So in order to have the death penalty, you have to have aggravating factors. And in this case, what they use is, hey, he's already in jail for murder. And he just murdered someone else. There's nothing else we could do. We have to give him the death penalty. So that opened up the door for Reggie and Chris Plor to challenge that earlier conviction. And through that, they were able to prove that he shouldn't have been in jail in the first place.
Investigating the case, that was the case of Obie Anthony. It meant that my students had to go down to parts of this city most people don't go to.
And so now, through this chain of connections, Mr. Hahn knows about Reggie Cole.
Chris Plor explained this Reggie Cole case. Told me he had this co-defendant. They were looking for representation.
Obie was our very first client, a client we got simply because we reached out to see who we could help. And he had a case that involved a murder that took place back in 1994.
Finds out that Reggie Cole has been, it's been determined that Reggie Cole was incompetently represented, that evidence was withheld in Cole's trial with Obie Anthony, who's an old friend of Reggie Cole.
And they started investigating, and they found out that in fact Mr. Anthony was innocent. But it's a whole nother thing to try to prove it to the court.
What do we learn? We learn the identities of the victims. We are put right in the scene of the crime, and right away we know, okay, this is a house of prostitution, this is not a good neighborhood. And a piece of this is, of course, these three guys were victims, but it's also important to know, why they were there and what they were doing. I mean, they weren't on a Boy Scout mission, okay? And so you know that pretty clearly from the get-go. You know it's late at night, you know they're at 49th and Fig, you know that they're basically there to see ladies of the night.
Well, Professor Levinson is good friends with my boss, who is also a professor at Loyola Law School. And she asked him, can you loan me an investigator that can help us with our first case, because Obie Anthony is Loyola's first case. And so my boss said, sure, I'll loan you Deborah Crawford.
You find out that Mr. Gonzalez is approached by these three African-American males. He gets grabbed by the neck, he gets shoved up against the car, hit in the face with a gun. There's some cursing, there's some screaming, there's some hitting.
I was assigned to the case in October of the year. I think it was 4 years ago now. And after I read about the case, as much information as I could, then I took a student from Loyola, because the students actually assisted me on the investigation with this case.
And then you kind of learn in the next paragraph that they were shot, that the driver of the car was shot, and that the friend who was left behind, the non-survivor, Mr. Gonzalez, was shot and killed and left in the street. And it's actually very, very dramatic, and you can kind of see it from the point of view of the two friends driving away, knowing that they couldn't get their friend in the car and that this horrible thing happened.
I think it was a very rushed process. People were very biased. People wanted to get it over with. There really was no hard evidence leading them to any one person. And so people got in their mind that it must be Obie, it must be Reggie Cole.
I think the main witness on the case for us was also the main witness on the case at the trial level. It was a pimp that lived in South Central, Mr. Jones, and He was the one that the district attorney's office used to prove the case and put Mr. Anthony away. But what we found as we investigated the case, that everything that he had said was a lie, just about everything. And that they had taken information and forced it to fit in order to convict Mr. Anthony and his co-defendant, Mr. Cole. So none of the facts were there. For instance, they had taken molds of the footprints that were left at the scene. They had dusted cars for fingerprints. There was a cigarette found at the scene. There was a beer can found at the scene. None of that DNA evidence led back to Mr. Anthony. Mr. Jones, the pimp, actually told the police officers that someone, a good Samaritan, the night of the murder, saw two or three guys running from his building. And he said that good Samaritan fired off some shots and hit one of the guys in the leg, and I saw him go down. So that gave the police officers a lead. Well, we know that one of the people at the scene got shot. So what we need to do is comb the hospitals, find somebody that was brought in with a bullet wound, and we'll have at least one of our guys. So they did that. They weren't able to get records that pointed to my guy or his co-defendant. So I don't know if you guys know, but the murder happened a couple of months before our guys were actually charged. So once they turned their attention to our guys, they actually went out to the jail and did what we call a body search on them. Had them stripped down and see if either one of them had a bullet hole in their leg. Well, Mr. Cole did. So LAPD goes back and they tell Mr. Jones, the pimp, one of the guys that we are looking at actually has a bullet wound in his leg. What they did not tell him is that that wound was 5 years old.
Basically, my job was to go to the site, take measurements, and figure out realistically where was this shooter standing.
Jones was working with LAPD and had been for years. He had been running his house of prostitution for maybe 15 years at that point. And no one had shut him down. And after I had talked to a couple of prostitutes, I found out that they were friendly with the police officers, the prostitutes were. So it was kind of, let's turn a deaf ear and a blind eye and just let him do his thing. After I figured that out, I thought, okay, Mr. Jones is getting special favors from LAPD. Pulled all of his prior records and found out that when Mr. Anthony and Mr. Cole were arrested, that the pimp had an open case.
The medical examiner testified that Mr. Gonzalez died of a through-and-through gunshot wound to the back. The wound was consistent with a distance shot, and the bullet's trajectory was 40 degrees downward. Critical fact, because Obie Anthony and his co-defendant were accused of shooting and killing Mr. Gonzalez on the street, basically in kind of hand-to-hand combat type situation. And if that were to be the case, you'd expect a completely different trajectory in terms of the bullet. And what you're seeing is somebody who was shot actually from someplace that was quite high up. I mean, a 40-degree angle is a pretty sharp angle. So that's a very important fact, even though it appears to be stated.
They needed someone who knew how to do trigonometry. They needed to, there was some information about the entry wound of how the bullet entered the body. They knew based on the autopsy report that it entered at a 40-degree angle. They knew that it entered because of where it is in his body. So it actually it went through, and so you could see where it entered and where it exited, and that's how they figured out the angle. And they knew the height at which it entered, which was, I believe it was 49.5 inches above the ground. And basically, because of how much gunpowder or bullet powder, whatever it was left, they knew that it had to be at least 18 inches away.
Felt this would be good leverage for the prosecutor to use. If they can get Mr. Jones to help them make the case, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. And that's exactly what had happened, but we couldn't prove it. Couldn't find that piece of paper.
What I did, I literally stood on the street after I crunched these numbers and was like, is it realistic to shoot your gun from here? Well, no. And it was honestly logic and trigonometry. So it's very simple math, but somehow that was math expert. I'll take it, you know. And then basically I measured from the top of the building. So seeing, is a shot from the roof plausible? Because we know that John Jones may have been on the roof.
Find his old attorney. He had died. Found his secretary, and I'm talking about Mr. Jones' old attorney, because I needed that record. Couldn't get that file. So I went back to the district attorney's office probably 3 times asking, give me everything that you have on the Obie Anthony case. The last time I went, one of the paralegals said, okay, let's go into our storage room and see if there's anything in there that you don't have. And it was on that last trip that we got that piece of paper where the judge had made a note saying that a deal had been made with Mr. Jones. And that was our critical piece of paper.
How many years were you in prison?
17 years.
And during those 17 years, were there times when you thought you'd never get out?
No, it was not. Like I said, it was like kind of like anxious, you know, waiting to hear what he's actually going to say. And so then when he came back with his verdict and with his ruling exonerating me, it was like, man. When they called me down the booking front, my reaction was like, are you sure you got the right guy? Is that the right booking number? I mean, like, we need to check. And so he said, yeah, this is your booking number is these numbers here, right? And your name is Obie Anthony, right? I'm like, yeah. He said, oh yeah, this is you. Life is on the line, and so and I knew how much time that I was looking. I knew I was looking at life without the possibility of parole, and so it was like, man, you just a bundle of nerves on the inside, anticipating what this individual was finna say. And so then when they did say guilty, it was like it's like this sinking feeling. When at the same time I had the sinking feeling, it was coupled with now what are you gonna do? You know, what are you gonna do to prove that you're innocent? How are you gonna do it?
Do you remember your first meeting with Adam Grant and Deborah Crawford?
For me, this was help, you know what I mean? And so it's almost like being a drowning victim in the middle of the water, and the rescue diver dives in. So when you see him, it's like, man, relief, help, save you, you know, some saving is coming. And so it's that feeling that you.
And did you feel optimistic at that point that the conviction would be overturned?
Oh, when I knew that I had help, I knew that it would be overturned. I knew that once someone basically got their hands on the case, took a look at the case and read the information, that they would see exactly what I had been saying, that I was innocent. And so, and that's exactly what happened when they got their hands on it. So.
When did you first meet Professor Levinson, and what was your first impression of her?
Oh man, my first meeting of Miss Levinson was at, we were sitting, I had been begging to see Miss Levinson too. Can I meet Miss Levinson? Can I meet Miss Levinson? And the first time I sat in front of her, we was down in Demand at the courthouse. She came back there in the holding tank, closed the door. How you doing, Obie? Sit down. Do you know John Jones? Straight to it. No, I do not. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Do you know John Jones? And I'm like, listen, no, I do not know John Jones. So she said, okay. And she went out there and fought and beat him up. One way from the very beginning, it was like when he said that, you know, he had, you know, when it's finding the facts and conclusion, when he came with his finding the facts and conclusion, and when he said that the things that he found that was an error, it was like, man, that's it. I think at that point, tears just got to flowing down my face because I realized, you know, in myself, he's going to just say it. Just say it. I'm going to keep saying it myself. Just say the conviction is overturned, right? And so when he finally said it, man, it was like, man, thank you.
I'm going to read you this little excerpt. Okay. For all of these reasons, this court finds that the petitioner was denied due process of law and was denied a fair trial. Therefore, the petition is granted and the petitioner's conviction is vacated and set aside. What was your feeling like when you first heard those words?
I don't know, man. It's a big ball emotion. Still today, it's that same type of feeling where you get this, it's like a ball in your pit of your stomach. Like it's almost like having a barrel full of fish and you grabbing them, but they slipping out of your hands. So when you finally grab one, it's like, yes, I got it. Yes, and so it's like that same situation in regards to individuals that's in the system, because, you know, though you may get your hands on them, but the system itself is slippery, and so it's not no guarantee what kind of verdict you may come back with, the judge may come back with. Even though you know that you did the best work that you can do, that you brought forth all of the facts that you can bring forth, but bam, they slip out of your hands. And so once that fish get back into the water, it's like, man, it's like you got to try. You want to go back after it. You know what I mean? So.
Can you describe the last hour or so that you were in prison?
I was giving service. I was on a tier. The young man that was on the tier that was responsible for giving service on the tier, he was giving, and he had got called out to go do something. And so, for whatever reasons, he asked me if, hey, look, can you do this for me tonight? And I appreciate it. He asked me if I can take over the service. In other words, give the service to the guys on the tier. And so I just talked to them at that time about being determined in your thought. You know, it's good to have blinders on, because you don't get distracted by all of the glitz and the glamour on the side, and you stay focused on what your objective is. And so it's good to have those blinders on. So I talked to him a little bit about that and how those things coincide with what the word tells them too as well, about staying focused on what's right and what's good. 17 years.
And during those 17 years, were there times when you thought you'd never get out?
No, it was not.
How did you manage to maintain that sense of optimism?
Through my faith. I had begun to start reading in the Word early on when I was before I got sent to prison, when I was in the county jail facility. And it was something in the Bible that I had read about the innocent being vindicated. And that sat inside me when I read that. It was because it was like a reassurance for me that I knew that the day would come for me to go home, but it was just about a matter of when it happened. And so I understood that then I have to grow in my patience for me to be able to kind of endure what was in front of me.
Are there things that you just appreciate in a different way now?
Yeah, man, look at almost everything. Like this right here, right? There are no trees in prison. Let's get this clear. It's just dirt, right? Everything is dirt and concrete. And so, man, it's like, man, people don't realize, man, look, we know we get oxygen from the tree and all of that stuff, but to be able to sit under it when it's scorching hot. So I was housed in Calipatria, which is down in Calexico, like El Centro area, Palm Springs. You get 117 degrees on the wake up. And it's 120 something inside those cells. And so to be able to come outside and sit up under a good shade tree, it's beautiful, I'm telling you.
And what's the best part about being free?
Man, it's being able to go outside at 3 in the morning if I chose to. Like right now, so I stay in Apple Valley, and from my backyard, like you can see like all of like the mountains of Big Bear right there, right? And so in the night, the sky is like ever clear. That's all you see is a billion stars.
My Lord, no more. My Lord, Lord, I'll never turn back no more. I found in Him may rest and play, and He have made me glad. No more, my Lord, no